PowerPoint. We're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. I'm doing it wrong. I listen to a lot of speeches given with PowerPoint. I give a few speeches given with PowerPoint, and I have made every mistake that's on my list. That's why I know we're doing it wrong. I've seen the impact. And if you're one of those fruity apple people that says, I use Keynote, therefore I'm not doing it wrong, probably chances are you're doing it wrong too. Maybe if you're a Prezi user, you might be doing it right, but only if you're really intentional about how you put that presentation together. So let's talk about what some of these mistakes are and how we can how we can avoid making them in the future. Number one, if you're using PowerPoint instead of speaker notes, you're doing it wrong. What do I mean by speaker notes? No, it's not an app. That's like old-fashioned note cards or notes printed on a piece of paper or maybe on an iPad or some kind of tablet. Speaker notes that you hold in your hands in front of you. Those are the things that you ought to be looking at. A lot of times people think they can be very confident and look unencumbered by standing up in front of an audience armed only with their PowerPoint and deliver their speech as if it was coming right off the top of their head. But they get about a slide in and they're suddenly looking around behind them, reading what's on the screen behind them. It's not effective at that point. The reason is the most important nonverbal tool a public speaker has is direct and extended eye contact. If you're looking at your screen and reading it word for word, and your audience is looking at the screen and reading it word for word, guess what you're not doing? That's right, you're not making direct and extended eye contact. Don't get me wrong, if you put a complete sentence up there, and sometimes you need to, you should read it word for word because you want your audience to see that and read it together. That's not the mistake most of us make. The mistake most of us make is putting too many complete sentences or too many long phrases in our PowerPoint presentation, mainly because we're trying to use it as a memory aid. PowerPoint should not be a memory aid for the speaker. It should be a visual aid for the audience. Outline your speech first. Look at your speech. Think clearly about what it is you really want your audience to see. And that's what you should display in PowerPoint. Everything else, you should have a blank slide in between slides so the audience has really nothing to look at but you when you're the one that's talking. But if you're using it as your main form of memory aid, as speaker notes, you don't look confident, you just look sloppy. Second, if you're inserting pictures that you do not intend to talk about, you're doing it wrong. When people follow the principles that I suggest, they end up with PowerPoint presentations that look really boring. And they say, this has got to get dressed up. So they start throwing in visual images and kinds of pictures that they don't intend to talk about, but just something that breaks the interest of the PowerPoint presentation. But remember, you are the eye candy. You are what you want your audience to look at for the majority of your speech. And if you've got a bunch of trinkets going on up here, then they're not watching what you have to say. Here's an example. Every speech teacher gets the "you should change your own oil" speech. And sometimes they'll put a picture of a car with its hood open. But they don't really talk about it. It's just there, sitting there with its hood open. And the audience starts to think, as I do, well, that's a sign of a person in distress. I wonder if the driver of that car needs help. I wonder if there's a family in that car. And then, maybe the parable of the Good Samaritan starts rolling through your mind and you really think, well, you got to pull over. And then you look carefully at that car, you don't see a family, and you notice it's on the lawn, and you think, I bet it's at one of those classic car shows, those open air sorts of things. And I think that's a concession stand right behind the car, isn't it? And I bet they've got some good Dr. Pepper. Oh, I'd like some Dr. Pepper right now. And maybe they sell funnel cake. I can smell the funnel cake. Can you taste the strawberry preserves on that funnel cake? It's great. And suddenly your brain's not thinking about an oil change anymore. It's thinking about funnel cake, which, come to think of it, is a bit like an oil change, but a different kind of oil change entirely. But look at the next slide this speaker had in his speech. In this slide, he showed the top of the oil cap inside the engine, telling us this is what you're looking for when you're changing your own oil. And he's pointing out to us that the grade of oil that goes into the engine is actually written on the oil cap. That's a good use of a picture. He's talking about the content, and the picture conveys something important for me to see. If you're just inserting pictures to have pictures to dress things up, you're distracting your audience, because pretty can be a distraction to effective speaking. But if you're showing pictures that you're going to talk about, that you're going to use to illustrate a point, that's an effective use of PowerPoint. That's a great use of PowerPoint. And that's why we have PowerPoint to begin with. Third thing that we do wrong. If you're using PowerPoint built-in design backgrounds, you're doing it wrong. We've seen all of those. We're not surprised by them. We're not attracted to them anymore. Many of them reduce the usable screen size with these convoluted images going across the screen. They often have a font size that is too small built into those designs. So the best option is to use a black background and bright text. I like Andy Stanley. I'm not trying to advocate for or against him as a theologian, a pastor, whatever. But one of the things I would encourage you to do, if you're going to use PowerPoint, look at the way Andy Stanley uses PowerPoint. Black background, yellow text. Almost every PowerPoint presentation he does has that exact same color scheme. It is a good color scheme to use, good contrasting colors, and not distracting when you're not talking about it. The built-in customized backgrounds are distracting, so let's avoid those, no matter how pretty you think they are. Fourth thing, if you center justify more than 3 lines of text, you're doing it wrong. People's eyes are trained to go to the left margin and to start their sentences at the same left margin every time. If they have to go hunting for that multiple times on one slide, they begin to get tired and give up trying to read the content. So use a left margin instead if you've got more than 3 lines of text that you're wanting to use. And while we're talking about text, if you're using all caps, you're doing it wrong. Again, people's eyes are trained to read the shape of words. So many of our words we recognize instantly because of their shape. We're not reading every single letter. But when we use all caps, we're giving people's eyes basically a rectangle to look at. And so they have to look at every single letter in order to make out what that word is. So use lowercase and uppercase letters. Give people shapes that they can read quickly. It's a more effective way to use PowerPoint. Number 6, if you're using bulleted lists for things that aren't bulleted lists or that aren't actual lists, you're doing it wrong. Why is that? Well, it's a sign that you've prepared your speech at PowerPoint and you're simply using that bulleted list as the substructure of your main point. That should go in front of you on your speaker notes, on your iPad, on your paper, on your note cards. It shouldn't be what's displayed to your audience. On the other hand, if you've got a discrete list, let's say, for instance, you're talking about how to recognize the signs of a stroke, and you use the acronym FAST, which says you look at the face, the arms, the smile, and the time, then that's a discrete list that's used by the CDC to encourage us on how to recognize the signs of stroke. That's a discrete list. That's a good use of a bulleted list. But just a series of supporting material and ideas, not a good use of a bulleted list. Those become redundant and superfluous, and so we stop seeing what's there. Number 7, if you're using PowerPoint's built-in charts and graphs tools, you're doing it wrong. You would think that the makers of Excel would give us a better tool to display numeric information on the screen, but they don't. They do give us Excel, and that's where you should make up your charts and graphs. Here's an example. This is an actual set of statistics taken from the 2012-2013 State of Our Nation's Youth Report. It shows that current high school students aren't as worried about current financial concerns as are recent graduates. About 46% at that time, 46% of current high school students said they were worried about finances. 54% said they were not. But recent college or high school graduates, they started worrying a lot more. Surprise, surprise. 63% of them worried about financial concerns as compared to 37% that were worried about it. You can't make all that work in PowerPoint using their graphs and charts tool because they create menus and you can't do anything but create the menu over to the side. What you want to do is get those labels as close to what they identify as possible. So flip over to Excel or your favorite spreadsheet, create a chart or graph that displays it the way you want it to look, some way that it's clear and people don't have to toggle their eyes over, and then make a picture of that, pull it into PowerPoint as a graphic. If you're not using animations to build lists, then you're doing it wrong. Animations allow you to show a different item on the screen, one right after the other, with a mouse click or with an advancer. It's a really good tool to use, by the way. We build those slides and work through them one at a time. When we talk to students about, in the old days, when I was teaching speech in the old days, we would tell students that they should not display their visual aid until they're ready to talk about it. And in those days, we were talking about physical visual aids. Saw a speech once where the student was talking about the bulldog and how it was bred for a particular anatomy and a particular features. And she actually had a bulldog, a live bulldog. Her husband brought it into class, and they put it up on the desk. And it sat there through the entire speech, panting away through the speech. There was a point in the speech where she talked about the anatomical features of the bulldog, the face and the chest and the arms. And that was a great point at which to see the bulldog. But she could have had her helper bring the dog in when she was ready to talk about and take it out when she was no longer ready to talk about it. But same thing is true with PowerPoint. You're leaving things up on the screen and people's eyes begin to get distracted by what they're seeing as opposed to what they're hearing. But bulleted list, if you're going to create a list, you can display each item one at a time with the mouse click so that they're only seeing what you're talking about at the time that you're talking about it. Well, there, friends, that's my list of things that if you're doing PowerPoint this way, you're doing it wrong. I hope that maybe that helps you do it right. I certainly think you ought to hold me accountable when you see me. If I'm using PowerPoint and I'm doing it wrong, point it out to me. Let's hold each other accountable so that we can get it right.